'tis I, your old pal King Chuck. I hope you're having a good day. It's going to be a beautiful weekend. And then next week here in Grand Rapids, it's going to be hot and humid in the 90s. There will be some little spots of rain, too, to help the gardens out and grass out a little bit. I might have to do some mowing this weekend. So a few days ago, I did a podcast on this radio station in Mackinaw City, which is on the tip of the Mitt here in Michigan, lower peninsula. The station is WSBX 94.5. 94.5 is being sold to a Christian organization called Northern Christian Radio for $200,000 by the current owner. His name is Billy Sowers. Billy also owns a radio station in Kentucky. He'll keep that, apparently. So what's going on is right now the station is simulcasting with a station up in Sault Ste. Marie that's actually owned by a guy who's been in the market for many, many years. His name is Tim Ellis. 95.1 and 94.5 the bridge. 94.5 is going to be going by the wayside. It's going to go to Jesus. And how ironic that the call sign WSBX was once used on a radio station in Florida. They had major its last owner was a guy who was kind of controversial in the radio business. This guy named Woody. Yeah, I heard he was a real scumbag, and his real name was Stephen Blood. Yeah, he bought this little daytimer in Florida, and he said he was going to bring all these big bands to the area, and it never happened. Yeah, I wonder what happened to him. Anyway, so back to WSBX. So WSBX is being sold to Northern Christian Radio, and I basically oppose the deal because how many Christian stations does Northern Michigan need? But then again, a couple of things happened since this deal was made. And as a matter of fact, I even had a comment about the last podcast. Somebody decided to post the podcast on the Buzz board of all places. Yeah, because my opinion still matters on there, apparently, even though I stopped posting on there about almost 20 years ago. So this is what this guy said. He went by the name BK 5150. And he said, they overbought, realized they could never make it back, have nowhere else to cut, and people don't want to hear the same 100 songs. Boston is 50 years old. Led Zeppelin retired nearly 50 years ago. It's that. CHR, top 40. Country, classics, what's left. They may as well sell it off, and the Jesus casters have the money. So it brings me to today's Bee-otch of the day. So right around that time, iHeartMedia announced massive cutbacks, massive layoffs, I should say. And Grand Rapids was no exception. Brett Bakita from Wood Radio, LT, morning guy at WMRR in Muskegon, laid off. LT worked here in Grand Rapids. He actually worked at KLQ for a good spell. So his story was he actually worked at KLQ using a pseudonym, Nozmo King. And he basically did like an Amos and Andy act on the radio. Because of this he did this black voice, and he said that he lost his dice game and card game and all that. And he did using like the stereotypical black voice. And, Nozmo King is, it's an old black joke about a woman who, her last name was King. She didn't know what to name her kid. She went into the maternity ward and went through this double door. The right side of the door said King, but then the left side said Nozmo, and that's how she got the name Nozmo. And somebody then told her, it actually says no smoking. Yeah. So, yeah, LT did that for many years. He also, he was the morning guy at WMMR 101.7 in Muskegon, which is that town's heritage rock station, although most of the time it's satellite fed. Then you had Eric Zane. Yep, Eric Zane got the heave-ho. He was doing afternoons at Big 101.3, the oldie station here in GR. Eric, and that means that he's been fired from all three major radio companies in Grand Rapids. He got fired from iHeartMedia. He got fired from Citadel. He was doing mornings at WBBL for a couple of years. And Town Square, well, he got fired from Free Beer and Hot Wings on GRD because he got, and it was all because of this argument he had with regarding the owner of the Deltaplex. And of course, the Deltaplex has since gone out of business. Yeah, he worked there as the PA announcer, and he complained about the bad equipment they had there. And the guy who owned the Deltaplex, he also owns the intersection. He's a right-wing piece of shit human being. I don't remember his name, but yeah, he even did I remembered one of the last things he did at the Deltaplex was this. He did a rally during COVID, some stupid rally about freeing up this country during COVID, and he was a piece of work, that human being. So now all these people, and then some, and I know a lot of other names I don't know, they were given all the heave-ho, and iHeartMedia released some stupid statement saying, well, we got to create a leaner company. And in iHeartMedia, what they do is they have this premium choice that they have on most of their stations. And what premium choice is supposed to do is basically it's like a satellite fed format with, complete with a out-of-town DJ and out-of-town music selections. I mean, when I was a kid growing up in northern Michigan, several radio stations did this. WGFM, the classic rock station, used Westwood 1 at night. And WCCW, Oldies 107.5, went to ABC Oldies Radio for the overnight hours and weekends. And they did this simply because it was to save money. I mean, the owners of Northern Michigan Radio really wanted to make a profit. So, hey, it's like, why hire over, weekend all these DJs? And, it made more sense to them. But, it also created a disconnect in the radio industry. I mean, it's like once upon a time, you had to start, it's like, you look at Howard Stern. He started in small market radio, $96 a week at this little station in upstate New York, and then WCCC in Hartford, W4 in Detroit. Actually, before that upstate New York station, he worked at a daytimer in Massachusetts, WNTN in Newton. And the boss said that he was so bad, he didn't even want to pay him. Yeah. But guess what? Howard, he learned, unlike so many people in the broadcasting business, he knew what he was doing wrong, and he improved on that. And he took the criticism like a man. Some people are like, there are people who work in Market 300 who probably have told people, don't make fun of me, don't bully me, blah, blah, blah. But, you got to realize who owns the airwaves. We, the human beings, own the airwaves. So now, I understand the radio business is losing money hand over fist. I mean, this guy, BK, told me, 5150, I checked his profile. He actually works in construction, but he's also a big Def Leppard, Van Halen fan. Hence the name, because they had a record called 5150. And here's the story, folks. It breaks my heart that you look at these big radio groups like iHeartMedia and Cumulus. Cumulus just went through bankruptcy. Town Square, they're trying to hold their own. They're broke as a joke. And what happened? I'll tell you what happened. He was right. They bought too many stations. And so many of these stations don't make a dime and have no listeners. WTKG here in Grand Rapids, 12:30 a.m. Who the fuck listens to that station? I mean, the only good thing about that station is, well, you get to hear Dave Ramsey live on there. He's actually live from like 3 to 6. I don't remember. Yeah, and then they put the show on New to 3. I forgot what time he's on actually live. But yeah, but then Wood Radio airs his show from 6 to 9. And of course, obviously, he's one of the top talkers in America. Even though he doesn't even host the show a lot of the time anymore, because he's always on the road with his going around and preaching to the masses about how to save money. And, the guy is I'll be honest with you. I've said this once, I'll say it again. The best way people can save money is to make it. And the best way to make it is to, understand that the real problem is there's a disconnect, the giant disconnect between the worker and the CEO. And that's exactly why people aren't making money. But as for radio, it's become a business that part of it is too overregulated and part of it isn't regulated enough. And guess who we can thank on this? The Republicans and even Bill Clinton. Once upon a time, and I've told you this story before, once upon a time, the FCC was an organization that cared, it was actually founded by FDR. He wanted to make radio a fair playing ground for all Americans. And he limited how many stations a company can own. NBC actually used to be 2 different networks at the time, the red and the blue. The FCC stepped in and said you can't do that anymore. They actually told NBC you got to sell some stations now. And it led to the creation of ABC, a 3rd network. Well, actually, there were 4 networks at the time: CBS, ABC, NBC, and Mutual. Mutual never really got into television. And then what happened was so this is what happened. Another thing that the FCC did right was they told TV manufacturers you got to put UHF on the dial. And the reason why was because there were too many TV markets, even in small, good-sized towns, that only had one TV license. It's because they were sandwiched in between so many other towns. And what happened to that was it forced one network to have less programming than the others. Toledo, Ohio had 2 TV stations. Channel 11 was CBS. Channel 13 was ABC. So NBC got the shorter end of the stick. Although, what's funny was that Channel 11, primary with CBS, actually carried NBC News. So it all depended on what stations carried what. 1 second. If my dog can drink, so can I. So the putting the UHF band on TV sets in 1964 helped so many markets. They freed up the band, so to speak. And then it happened. And then it happened. In 1978, the Federal Communications Commission, the Supreme Court, made a ruling regarding indecency in broadcasting. It was a 5-4 decision. And the 5 voters for this law were all Nixon appointees. And the rule was that there are 7 words you cannot say in broadcasting. And of course, we all know what those words are. Shit, piss, cocksucker, fuck, motherfucker, tits, and cunt. I think those are the 7 dirty words. So what happened was the FCC, what they did, and they also said that, you cannot air any indecent programming between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. So Nixon was a big reason why broadcasters had to adhere to what they can and can't do on TV and radio. And then what happened was in the 80s, Nixon, the FCC under Reagan got rid of the Fairness Doctrine, and it paved the way for people like Limbaugh and Hannity and Mark Levin. All these right-wing idiots who go on the air and spread lies and rumors and all kinds of vitriol. One of the people who actually voted against this decision back in 78, by the way, was Thurgood Marshall. And I would imagine that Thurgood knew that these, if this law was passed, then what would have happened was the FCC would do more damage. And the reason why was because back in the 50s, he made he was on the Today Show with Dave Garroway, and there was a television station in Jackson, Mississippi, WLBT Channel 3, that blacked out the interview. And they lied to the audience and said, cable trouble, sorry. But the truth was, the company was, the station was owned by this insurance company that was basically white supremacists. They wanted nothing to do with black people or people of color. So that's what they did. They said, we will not have anything having to do with colored people. And that means that if NBC forces us to have all black people on the screen, we're going to black it out. But then the FCC stepped in and said, nope, can't do that. You're breaking the Fairness Doctrine. And after years of fighting and whatnot, in 1971, their license was revoked. The FCC took away their license, gave it to a nonprofit group that included black investors, and they actually had a job of making the station into a station of tolerance, which I thought was a great idea. So that's what happened to WLBT TV. But now, with the Fairness Doctrine dead and gone, guess what happened? Now, the FCC was creating a whole new generation of Lamars by telling the stations that own AM radio stations, go ahead and air Limbaugh and all of his trolls. And then this is where Clinton comes in. 1996, he passed the Telecommunications Act. Once upon a time, you could only own one AM station, one FM station, and one TV station. Well, now, all of a sudden, it was 2 AMs, 6 FM, and 2 TV stations in major markets. And that was only if one station was much lower rated than the other. But in smaller markets like Traverse City, where I'm from, it was still one station. So anyway, so at the end of the day, the FCC, at the end of the day, that's what they did, is basically they wanted to eliminate smaller broadcasting companies and create less competition. And that's one of the worst things that Bill Clinton ever did, is that way he destroyed the broadcasting business. And what's funny is, I mentioned this recently, Sault Ste. Marie up in the Upper Peninsula only has one company owning most of the radio stations in town, called Sovereign Communications, and they have major financial difficulties. The FCC even dinged them recently because they weren't paying their yearly FCC license renewals. So they're on the hook for over $30,000. And, and not only that, there was another company that recently had to silence a company called Connoisseur Media over in Iowa. They had 4 radio stations, and they had to silence them all because they ran out of money. This is what deregulation does, is it tells basically what they want to do as broadcasters is they want to create an environment where they basically will have people bow to them. And when you don't have competition, you have crappier programming, fewer DJs. Way back in the olden times, there was DJs only worked at one radio station and one radio station only. And now, with deregulation, you got DJs who work at 2 different stations and maybe even a couple of dozen through voice tracking. And it's stupid, in my opinion. I mean, and of course, let's and under George W. Bush, their FCC decided, we're going to go ahead and jack up indecency fines because of the Janet Jackson nip slip. And of course, people, Howard Stern made the jump from CBS radio to Sirius XM, and now he's heard all across the country. He can do pretty much whatever he wants. He's got a lot of freedom to do whatever he wants, and and millions of people followed him over there. And when he was on terrestrial radio, there were a lot of morning shows that were competing against him. And now, you ask me who the number 1 syndicated morning show in America is, I couldn't even tell you. And I'll tell you why. It's because, and a big reason why, is because, is because all these part of the reason why is because they decide to tame themselves down because they don't want to get dinged by the FCC. But you got to remember something. Part of the reason why the FCC, way back in 1978, the reason why they boosted, they created all these crazy laws, was because there was a devout Catholic man who complained to the FCC. And back then you had all these decency groups, you had all these people who were religious, and they said that nobody's ears should be or eyes be exposed to anything that was wicked, and they would throw Bible verses all over the place. And I'm like, okay, so how many of these groups are still around? You got to remember that the group that fought for tougher indecency laws was the Parents Television Council. They just filed for bankruptcy, and I think they don't even exist anymore because they're broke. And I'll tell you why. It's because more and more people are leaving broadcast television and going to streaming. They'd rather stream their shows, and young people don't have cable anymore. People aren't watching. Eric Andre was on Howard Stern the other day, and he had this long-running show on Adult Swim. And what happened was he basically said that Adult Swim has lost a ton of viewers over the years because more and more their core audience all switched to streaming. So basically, it's Netflix or nothing. And you see, that's the problem and now, under Trump, the FCC, what they want to do is, here's the thing, folks. I saw some of these stupid commercials. ABC, they basically are putting ABC under the microscope because of Jimmy Kimmel and The View, or anybody who criticizes Trump on FCC mandated airwaves. And what they want to do is tell you and me, tell the broadcasters, well, if you attack Donald Trump, we're going to take away your license because what you're doing is anti-American. It's not anti-American. What's anti-American is violating the First Amendment. And that's exactly what Trump is doing. Telling broadcasters, people like Jimmy Kimmel or the ladies on The View, no can do. Yeah, we're going to censor you because, we're going to take you off the air because, in Trump's mind, everybody still loves him. Yeah, I saw the other day he only attracted like 1,000 people to a rally in Washington, and people were just walking away. Yeah, he can't even get 1990s acts to appear at his stupid fair, America's Town Fair, or whatever the fuck that's called. It's like, okay, man, nobody likes you. Nobody likes your policies. I mean, you go around and tell the middle class no taxes on tips or overtime, and yet these people are not getting any overtime right now because the economy sucks. I mean, normally this time of year, I'm working on 10 hours a day and Saturday, and I'm not doing it right now because, part of it's because our company can't get enough workers. Yeah, I'm actually in an industry that's almost fireproof. Almost layoff proof. I mean, we're actually in need of workers right now, to tell you the truth. But you see, folks, this is what happens when businesses get deregulated and you decide to get rid of the playing field. And it's funny that I mentioned Mackinaw City. Normally this time of year, I'm actually up in Mackinaw City right now for the St. Ignace show. And I used to go there every year, and then, life kind of, COVID hit, and my dad and I bought a house, and, and then my dad had back problems, and, there's always next year. I mean, but then again, most of the people who go to that car show are way older than I am. And then, so the story kind of goes like this. So, story about Mackinaw City this week. So, Mackinaw City, St. Ignace, and Mackinac Island are huge tourist areas. And what happened was, once upon a time, there were like 3 ferries that took off from Mackinaw City in St. Ignace and went to Mackinac Island. And these ferries would take people to the island and back several times a day. I believe one was called Starline, another was called Arnold, and Shepler's. And they were owned by several different ferries, families. And then one ended up buying out the other. Another bought out the other. And then they all got bought out by this family from Florida called the Hoffmans. And, you know, I went to Mackinac Island in 2009. And what happened was, for a round trip from Mackinaw City to St. Ignace, not to St. Ignace, but to Mackinac Island, was about $24. It wasn't too bad. And then, just the other day, for, shits and giggles, I decided to see how much it is to go from the mainland to Mackinac Island. And for a round trip, 17 years later, it's $39. And I'll tell you the reason why. It's because of deregulation. And I guess there's even like a Mackinac Island Travel Bureau or whatever. And they worked with the Hoffmans and tried to tell them, look, people want to go to Mackinac. You're running a monopoly here. You're not being competitive. And so we're going to regulate that, yeah, 39 is okay. Gas prices have gone up a lot since then. And, you got to maintain your boats and blah, 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 blah. So, okay, it is reasonable. Bear in mind that the Hoffmans also own the newspapers on Mackinac Island in St. Ignace. So these people really want to take a bunch of hard-earned money away from people. So they want, they look at this area and think, well, we can make a lot of money off of it. It's a part of the American dream. And bear in mind, of course, that the Hoffmans also own a bunch of other tourist businesses as well. They also own a few other newspapers. Well, guess what the Hoffmans did the other day? Guess what they did earlier this week? They purchased the Pittsburgh Penguins hockey team in the NHL, $1.7 billion. And what's funny is that back when the Red Wings were a hot commodity in hockey, the Pittsburgh Penguins were anything but. They were playing in this old arena that was shaped like an igloo. They were a 67 expansion team. They were in dire need of a new arena. I remember all that. And they were out of money. They were bankrupt. And I guess what happened was Mario Lemieux, who is one of their greats, came in to become a part owner of the team. And he helped to rescue the team. Of course, he had to get a principal owner as well. So they ended up with new owners. Now, what happened was, the Hoffmans are buying the Penguins. The sale was finalized the other day. So the Hoffmans owned the team. They bought the team from a guy named John Henry. John Henry is the owner of the Boston Red Sox, but he also owns teams from around the world. He bought the team 5 years ago for only $900 million. So he made an $800 million profit off of this sale, which isn't too shabby. Of course, he'll continue to own the Red Sox. He also is a part owner in RFK Racing. That's Roush Fenway, he calls his company Fenway after Fenway Park in Boston. And Keselowski, Brad Keselowski, is a racer in the NASCAR, NASCAR Cup Series. And, unfortunately, since he started RFK Racing and started owning himself, he has not really been much of a winner. I mean, I think he was like 34th place last weekend in the San Diego race that was on that pier. But what happened is, the reason why I'm telling you this story is because when you got deregulation, this is what you get. You create a class of billionaires, and of course, under Trump, you get a trillionaire, Elon Musk. Elon Musk became a trillionaire when SpaceX became a publicly traded company. And all of Trump's billionaire buddies got even wealthier. While we, the American people, are wondering, okay, how are we going to put food on our table this week? And of course, earlier this week, Trump really screwed over the housing market because he was supposed to sign some deal on creating more regulations on who can own homes and all that, because so many homes here in America are owned by corporations. But Trump was like, yeah, I'm going to go through Congress first. And I'm like, dude, you didn't go through Congress to go through, put us into this war in Iran that we end up fighting for no reason. That cost us billions of dollars. Of course, we bombed a children's school in Iran. Gas prices went sky high. And of course, earlier this week, it went up to $4.29 a gallon here in town. And of course, thankfully, it's down to $4.15 in a few places. But the reality is simple. This is why Donald Trump is our president, because he fooled Americans into thinking that deregulating everything is a great thing and doging everything is a good thing because we're going to save money. No, the money ends up going into the pockets of the billionaires and investors, and it's we, the American people, who get screwed. And you look at iHeartMedia, and, here's another thing I just thought about. Just a few weeks ago, it was announced that SiriusXM and iHeartMedia were actually in merger talks. But now they've been called off. Gee, I wonder why. Oh, yeah, it's because iHeartMedia ain't making a dime while SiriusXM is. SiriusXM knows how to make money, folks. iHeartMedia, on the other hand, is just homogenized radio, boring AF, the same 100 songs day in, day out. And who is the big loser in all this? The listeners and the, not just the listener, but the people who still work there, who now not only have to do a live shift on one of their stations, but they have to voice track on another. And that's foolish. And this is why, when I was a kid, I wanted to work in radio. I wanted to become a programming director and basically say that people in northern Michigan deserve a kick-ass rock format. And, you got to be a risk taker in the business. Now we don't have risk takers anymore because radio has become too homogenized, and the real loser ends up, like I said, being the listener and the worker. And this is why, I see a lot of people listening to Spotify and SiriusXM on their phones. And, I got SiriusXM in my car. I also have SiriusXM on my phone. And I look at GRD here in Grand Rapids. GRD is... I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not a fan of GRD. I don't want to hear a newer rock song or a song from my childhood go back to back with a song from that my stepdad loved back in the 70s, like Leonard Skinner or Carry On My Wayward Son. If I hear that song, Carry On Wayward Son, on a rock station, I'm going to instantly flip the station. Because I get douche chills when I hear a lot of 70s music. I'm sorry, but not sorry. But that's what we've gotten to, folks. Radio stations that become so unprofitable and run by such idiots that they end up broke and nobody else wants to buy them, so they end up being sold to Jesus, and they become yet another repeater station for the religious right. And I told you what kind of programming this company provides. Northern Christian Radio. They had a radio show, a talk show I was listening to on one of their stations a few years ago, and they had some nasty old woman screaming and yelling that Biden is indoctrinating our children and transgender, blah, 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 blah. This is the type of programming, type of radio station that's buying stations. And they're turning terrestrial radio into, like really bad CB radio from the 70s. Yeah, it's hatred. That's what it is. And this is why so many people like me have abandoned organized religion. I mean, hell, I even went to a left-leaning church a few years ago, and I quit because there was an asshole who wanted me to give him money and rides, and he kept calling me and bitched and moaned at me that his life sucked and he didn't know how to fix it, and he looked to me to fix it for him. And the way I could do it was to give him money. It's like, I don't give a fuck. You get off your ass and find a job like most normal people. Because this guy did not have one, but he was incapable. So sometimes, in the great words of Buck Strickland from King of the Hill, sometimes you gotta kill the horse to save the leg. And that's exactly what I did. And I know. Folks, I hate to say radio is dying. And I wish there were more radio stations out there on terrestrial radio that were all doing the right thing, but they're not. Because America, let's face it, in my lifetime, we've only had two really good presidents, Obama and Biden. And the other presidents were all about giving money to the wealthy. This is what we get. You turn on the radio, you hear a ton of commercials, you hear too many songs that you don't like. And in a town like, an area like northern Michigan that's 90% white, here in Grand Rapids, yes, and even in major cities, the answer also becomes, let's sell to ethnic groups, because not as many of them have a good cell phone that can play music. And not only that, I look at my parents. They don't have the coolest cell phones on the market. I mean, as a matter of fact, my dad is with Consumer Cellular, and he's got one of the cheapest smartphones you can buy on the market. Ditto with my mother. And when I was a kid, when I was a young boy, when I was a kid, it was radio's number one goal not to go after the seniors, because they were the ones that didn't even have money to begin with. And now it might as well be their only audience, because they don't have cool phones. They just want to turn on the radio and listen to whatever song that's on there. And if they don't like it, they can change the channel. But that's the problem. My mom and dad don't have a lot of money. I mean, my dad lives on Social Security. My mother actually had to take a job working in fast food because, you know, her retirement ran out very quickly. But that's the way it is. And that's what I have to say about that. But you see, radio needs, that's the thing, that's what we should have done in the first place, is not over-regulate, you know, the content on radio, but regulate who can own a radio station and create more competition. And competition is always a good thing. Hell, look at Mackinac Island. Here's another example. Mackinac Island only has one grocery store, Dowd's. Dowd's has been in business since 1883. You know, their store is only 4,000 square feet. They are a really tiny grocery store. If a store like Dowd's existed here in Grand Rapids and they offered full-line groceries, they'd probably be killed in an instant. But for the people of Mackinac Island, that's all they have. When I was up there in 2009, a gallon of milk at Dowd's was $4. I would imagine it's way more now because, you know, you got to pay to transport the milk as well on the boat. It's not like, I think they're supplied by Spartan Nash. Of course, Spartan Nash is now CNS. So I would imagine if CNS Wholesale would like to learn how to build a truck that can actually go on water. You know, I doubt if that's going to happen, but wishful thinking. But that's what happens when you don't have competition and you're the only store in town, you know, within driving distance. And, not only are you paying for transport, but you're also paying for the convenience, to bring convenience to the people. And I know the Mackinaw City region is like that too. A lot of businesses are owned by this family, the Lehios. I told you the story. The Lehio family, they're a bunch of scumbags. They made headlines a few years ago because there was a woman who actually was screamed at by a Lehio family member at one of their hotels. She brought her kids with her, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, they were being booted out because the toilet broke. And it was on them. And the guy said it was on them. And so, and not only that, she was wearing a mask, and the guy was saying, "Don't be such a Democrat." Yeah, so in the middle of the night, this poor woman and her kids actually had to go all the way down to Gaylord and get a hotel there. And when Mr. Lehio, the actual owner of the hotel, heard about what happened, he offered to send this woman his apologies. Here's a free night stay at my hotel. She said no. I don't blame her, because now she's heard everything wrong about the Lehio family, and the fact that they have pulled this same crap with all their hotels and restaurants. They pay their employees crap wages, and they, nobody wants to work for them. It's the same old song and dance. And now the good news is there are hotels and restaurants in Mackinaw City that aren't Lehio owned. But unfortunately, you got to know where to stay, because the problem with the Lehio this is what the Lehios actually did. They actually created a fake website called the Mackinaw City Chamber of Tourism. And it led people into thinking that it was the Mackinaw City Chamber of Commerce. And they actually had to put a disclaimer on the bottom of the page that this is a family-owned company. And what happened was, Dane and Nessel really got tough on the Layoffs. They also own Mackinaw Crossings, and they also, I believe, own the movie theater in town, which kind of serves as the de facto movie theater also to St. Ignace, in some cases, Mackinac Island. And the story is, they bought the theater from the Dawson family, and they're a fucked up family too, because of the fact that they were not paying their taxes. They got caught, and so the matriarch of the family, Elaine, she actually went to jail for a couple of years. I can go on and on, folks, but the rest of the story is that this is what deregulation does. It creates less competition, and not only that, poor quality and fewer employees. This is why we need to think where we do our business. And as for me, I've said this once and I'll say it again, I don't like terrestrial radio. I gave up on it over 20 years ago because of what the people in northern Michigan and what people like Matt Hanlon did here in Grand Rapids. They put their own interests in front of mine, and we, the listeners, lost. And I've said this before. I think I may have even said this before. When KLQ was airing Opie and Anthony in the morning, I only knew of one person who listened to KLQ then. And he was one of the dumbest people I ever met in my life. He actually was saying to me, "Hey, did you hear on Opie and Anthony? Blah, 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 blah." And then what happened was, we all knew what happened to Opie and Anthony. It turned out that, number one, they didn't even like each other. And number two, Anthony was a racist, woman-beating piece of shit human being. He was a scumbag, folks. And I can't believe that they took Howard Stern off the air, put on a bunch of crappy morning shows that didn't work out, like Ron and Don and Justice and Jim and Gray and Cluck. Oh my God. People can't understand what the hell they're thinking. But we all knew what happened to KLQ. They went out of business. They flipped, 94.5 became a country station. 107.3 became a sports station, WBBL. And then back to country. And the WKLQ call letters went back on 94.5, and it became the Q, which is this pretty much a soccer mom station. All I can say, folks, is, if this is why radio is failing. They don't understand what the listener wants or needs anymore. And it's going to get worse with AI. And I know there's some people out there who are pro mining centers, and I've seen what mining centers do to the water supply for the community. They turn it into mud. How about creating actual jobs for actual people who need them, and to pay them a fair wage? That's what we need. But nonetheless, I've looked at what has happened with iHeartMedia. It's one clusterfuck after another. And, something needs to happen, folks. Something needs to happen. And I think if our next president of the United States is a true blue, honest to goodness Democratic socialist, they will go after the FCC and tell them, you guys are not protecting anybody. You are protecting your investors. You're screwing over your listeners. You screwed over Howard Stern. I think they even still owe Howard Stern a lot of money after dumping his show on all their stations. And, you know, it just goes on and on. If they need, you know, radio needs to change for the better, not for the worse. Because let's face it, if they want to stay competitive, they got to know what people want. They got to look at ratings. They got to, and if they have a station that doesn't have ratings, ask your listeners, what kind of radio station would you like to have on terrestrial radio? It's plain and simple. I mean, don't assume that this will work or that will work in the area. That's what it is. Anyway, how long have I been ranting? 55 minutes. Okay, now it's 56 minutes. That's enough. Okay, I gotta get going. I'll talk to you later. Good day. Good luck. Have a good weekend, everybody.